When Secrets of Power was being spoiled, I thought the new Jabba the Hutt leader had a lot of potential, and when the competitive players got a hold of him, it seems like he wasn't quite up to the same level as some of the more competitive leaders in the game. But I pulled a showcase, so tell me if you've been here before. That means I had to build a deck that made him work, and today I have a Jabba the Hutt Tarkintown list that I think is really fun. It works pretty well, and it's, I get to play Jabba, which is sweet. I like to get to play my showcases. So in this video, I'm going to show you my Jabba the Hutt Tarkintown list that throws tons of damage around, blows up the board, kills Han 2 decks really easily, and you're going to have a good time while you're doing it. So let's jump right into it. What's up everyone, it's Dan with Main Deck and welcome back to another one of our deck profiles here on Main Deck. We like to do decks that are going to be super fun at not only the kitchen table, take them to locals, throw some fun things around, and I don't know, if you're a competitive player, maybe you can find some inspiration in here and figure out how to tweak it to take it to your next PQ or beyond. Today we are looking at the one and only Jabba the Hutt, wonderful human being from Secrets of Power, a Vigilance leader that really likes stuff to be damaged, your own things, your opponent's things. We're going to have a fun time with a bunch of cards that you don't always get to play, and a bunch of cards that really are probably more competitive in other leaders, but work super well here to close the game and I don't know, shock people with your ability to win with your Jabba the Hutt deck. So let's jump right into the profile and start going through everything. Now, here we have Jabba the Hutt, wonderful human being. Our leader, of course, has the ability action, pay 1, exhaust. A friendly damaged unit deals 1 damage to an enemy unit. If the friendly unit has 3 or more damage on it, it deals 2 damage instead. Now, the big drawback of Jabba the Hutt is that stuff with damage on it doesn't usually sit on the board for long. It's not something that you just get to often hold on to with that damage. We're going to try with this deck design to take advantage of being able to keep those on the board as much as possible, to be able to use this action when we can. And it does feel really good when you're able to throw this around and get kind of that free damage, especially the 3 damage threshold for 2, getting a Daring Raid activation every turn on your leader. I mean, it feels pretty good. Again, it's not going to be every turn, but for a couple of turns, you're going to definitely be in control of the game there. Now, he has a flip on 5 resources. So on turn 4 is when you're flipping Jabba the Hutt, and when you do, his flip side is actually extremely strong. I think it is pretty quick for the opponent to try and gain control of it, get him off the board and stop this, but we have some cards in here where you're going to get to take some pretty cool advantage of this ability. It's not an action. It's a basically free trigger that whenever another friendly unit is dealt damage and survives, you may have that unit deal damage, that much damage to an enemy unit, but you can only use it 1 time per round. Now, he has that on a 2/8 body, and it would be broken if it could trigger on him. It does mean you need to have things in play, though, that can take that damage, but it can be as simple as throwing one of your units into theirs, getting the trigger, or we have some other units that are going to kind of self-trigger in their own ways to at least get free pings of damage, if not free big chunks of damage. So let's dive in a second and look at all those, but real quick, of course, our base here, as you heard, is Tarkintown. The one problem with Tarkintown, you got 25 life, which is not a lot. 25 HP, your opponent can chew through that really fast. So this is a deck of really being able to control the board as much as possible in the early game especially. You just can't let anything exist on the board. And when you keep the board clear, this deck can be pretty powerful. You just have to kind of turn the corner on the mid game, and as long as you can do that, you are golden. And Tarkintown really helps you do that. Of course, in that early game, you're going to use, we'll talk about some of the lines, but you're going to be able to throw some free pings around, or those 1-cost pings from Jabba. Use Tarkintown to finish things off and use that to hold the fort for the first 2 to 3 turns as you try and build into your stronger plays. Now, let's go into the actual deck list now, the main deck, and see what we're working with here. And the first thing you'll notice is that this is a deck that is heavily space-oriented, which I don't know if a lot of Jabba the Hutt decks you're going to expect to see are going to do that. The reason we're so heavily space-oriented, though, is that so many decks are not heavily space-oriented. Those decks are often going to do things like throw a Sabine's Masterpiece or an A-Wing or something into the space arena and just kind of hope it sticks, hope it deals damage, without necessarily being able to commit a lot to the space arena. That actually gives us a nice opportunity to get some swings in, clear that off, at least either put pressure on the board in the space arena so that while we're kind of controlling the opponent's their tempo in the ground arena, we're at least pressuring them so we can not have to hold out until a super late game all the time. But sometimes we're able to set up plays where we can clear their space units and stick with a damaged unit in the space arena, which allows our Jabba the Hutt to be activated more often. So that's kind of the line we're looking at here. Now for our ground units, we're going to start with Dr. Pershing, Experimenting with Life. This has got to be the best unit in the deck, though. Like, honestly, every game you see with Dr. Pershing feels totally different than games where you don't see Dr. Pershing, because he does absolutely everything in this deck. He's a 0/5. He's got a healthy HP threshold where you're able to get that damage to stick on him and then use that Jabba the Hutt trigger. He does damage to himself or to other units, and you can draw a ton of cards with him when you start throwing it onto other units as well. And he draws cards, which of course is really good because we are playing effectively a control deck here, and we want to have a hand size, we want to have options, we want to be able to find our key pieces to keep the board under control. Now, some of the lines you're going to end up doing is Dr. Pershing. When you have the initiative on the first turns, you win the die roll, you get to drop that Dr. Pershing. It really sets you up nicely for some really cool lines. I think my favorite one of the most common ones I play, is they play anything to the ground arena. They play a Gunji, they play a Karis Nemec's actually a little more annoying than all the others, but they play any turn one play to the ground arena. You take initiative. On your next turn, you can force choke whatever they play to the ground arena, and then you are left with one resource still. They play a second thing that turn, or their second unit, they play their first thing that turn, draw a card with Pershing, deal 1 damage to him, then use Jabba to deal 1 damage, and then you activate Tarkintown to deal an additional 3 more damage. And by doing that, you've got a card draw, you've got a Pershing still in play, you've cleared both of their units on the board. They did draw a card, but we don't really care that much about that. And that kind of sets you up now to be in the driver's seat going to the next turn. If they're still willing to play one more thing, at that point, maybe you can power the dark side it and keep control that way as you go into turn 3, turn 4. And by doing that, that's the general line you're looking at doing. There are a number of different ways to do that, but the most efficient one is using a Pershing into a force choke, and then having something like Power the Dark Side or Takedown on the next turn to follow it up. I can't stress how good Pershing is. I think in almost all openers, unless I know I'm going against like a space heavy deck that I need to contest a really aggressive deck like Kaz or Han 4 or something, I want to play Pershing right away. Otherwise, I maybe go to space. But we have a secondary option, HK47. He is there to chill on the board, to be able to kind of threaten things while still potentially holding some damage on him to be able to activate Jabba. And then has this fun thing where, since we're trying to control the board so much, he does get some pings on the opponent. And I've had HK47s add up pretty well throughout various games, so I definitely haven't minded having him here. He's been a solid 2-drop, not the best thing in the world, a pretty easily resourced one. I like most of the other ones better, but hey, he's there. He does his thing. Now, Death Trooper, this is a card I don't think I've seen really played much at all since set 1. Back in set 1, this was a staple play. You would play this to get, efficient damage on the board and control things. These days, we have 3-drops that are often doing a lot more. He still can be good, especially when you get to combine him with Jabba the Hutt activations or that Tarkintown. You still are able to get some pretty good board control out of him. But where he's especially cool is once you flip Jabba, you can go into that 5-resource turn 4. Now on this turn 4, you have those 5 resources. What you're going to do is be able to flip Jabba the Hutt. With Jabba flipped, when you play the Death Trooper, his when played ability is going to deal 2 damage to him, 2 damage to a ground unit, and then Jabba's going to trigger because you dealt 2 damage to the Death Trooper and deal an additional 2 damage. So Death Trooper gets to act actually like an immediate 4 damage to the board, putting a 3/1 into play. Or if you had something else to put the damage on, just don't put it on Jabba because he won't trigger then. Then you actually still have a 3/3 unit or something, which is kind of nice. But you deal 4 immediate damage to something on the board, and you still have 2 resources left over to be able to play a Force Choke, allowing you to stack up to like 9 damage on something on that one turn or split it among multiple things. it can be actually a decently powerful play. Even on the turn before that, the turn before you flip, turn 3, Death Trooper followed up by that activation of Jabba is going to deal enough damage plus a Tarkintown to kill even a 6 HP thing, which is a lot. I mean, it ends up working out pretty well and still leaving you with a, you know, decently threatening unit on the board, something that does have to be dealt with or it's going to start punching in damage. So I thought maybe I'd end up cutting the Death Trooper, but it's, frankly, for Jabba the Hutt, we don't have a lot of efficient plays on the 5 resource turn to deal more than 2 damage. Like I think this deck would kind of go over the top if we had something that had a good 5 or 6 HP and dealt like 3 or 4 damage to itself when it came in. I think then we'd be going like, okay, now we get like pretty cool plays with Jabba where we can deal a lot of damage to something, maybe dealt damage to itself to deal more damage to something else. We had like a super Death Trooper on 5. That's what I want to have. I want to have a souped up Death Trooper, but I don't have that. So I have to settle for what we do have. And what we have is, all right. Now, Nima Outpost Constables, this was probably the last thing I added to the deck list because I really was just struggling in this mid-game to always have control of the board. And I was looking through the list of cards like, this is actually the one deck where I think I want to play this really badly. This is a 2/6 with Sentinel for 4. And as a 2/6, it's just out of the range of damage for a lot of decks where they kind of have to crash into it and it survives. And the fact that that happens means you have these really cool lines where he can come down and just start protecting a Pershing, even taking damage from the Pershing, and usually absorb a couple of attacks, giving you extra card draws, which is nice. But the really cool line is if you can get him to exist or play him on the turn you flip Jabba, you can flip Jabba and put out a 2/6 Sentinel, and suddenly all of your opponent's plays just are kind of bad because unless they can immediately attack in and deal 6 damage, which is possible, but in a lot of situations it's not, then anything they use to attack in the Nima Outpost Constables is going to deal that much damage back to something because of Jabba's trigger, which is pretty sick, actually. So I've been really impressed with this dumb little fringe unit here, 2/6 Sentinel, but it works out really, really nicely in this deck. And finally, we have Darth Vader Scourge of Squadrons. I don't know, I might be the game's #1 Scourge of Squadrons fan, but I can always find time to steal games away by going turn 1 ship, turn 2 Vader. Do you have the answer? And when they don't have the answer, you blow them out a lot of the time. But in this deck, especially since we're so space heavy, Darth Vader introduces some really nice lines towards the late game to find secret free damage, punch a lot faster than your opponent thinks when you throw this on an IG-2000, a Ruthless Raider, or even a Devastator or something. And in this deck in particular, I have played him as a ground unit a surprising amount of times because once your opponent has kind of exhausted everything, clearing your board, and you've been kind of doing the same thing to them, you can drop this 7/7 down. If your Jabba has survived, this can swing into most of the great units in the game. You can swing this into a Luke Skywalker, take 6 back, and deal 6 to something else. And that starts to feel very, very unfair when you can do that. Now, that's something you can probably do that more often on decks like ECL Jabba, the green Jabba decks. But hey, I like the Tarkintown. I like the control we have over the early game with this deck, and it allows us to play Scourge of Squadrons in here and do a lot of fun things in space. So let's talk about what we're doing in space because yeah, we're gonna have a good time here. We have a couple of 2-drop units, Onyx Squadron Brute, just a basic 2/3, with a little when defeated. I like to put a little bit of healing in the Tarkintown lists because otherwise some of these aggro or even aggro mid-range decks just take you out of the game. Onyx gives you a little bit of that option. It's just on a healthy enough body for space. And then Strike Ship, which is one of my favorite units in here because as a 0/3 with Overwhelm and Raid 3, when you throw that Darth Vader on it, it gets extremely scary, especially because the Overwhelm is a really good keyword to have with Jabba the Hutt when you get him flipped. If you can ever set that up, the opponent puts into play a space unit just because they're trying to survive. You swing the Strike Ship into it. If you get to Overwhelm over it, you take the damage on your unit from Jabba, deal it to something else with Jabba's trigger, and then overwhelm the damage and still get the Vader trigger. You're throwing so much damage all over the place. Otherwise, it's just the most threatening way to throw Vader at the opponent on a turn 2 play when you get to pilot that Vader right on it. We have IG-2000 in here. This has been a pretty flexible unit. I really do enjoy it in here. Another unit with Overwhelm, another great thing to throw a Vader onto. But with this when played, it is a little bit more impactful than you'd think on the Jabba flip turn. I've had a surprising amount of games where I get to flip Jabba out, play IG-2000, ping 2 of my opponent's units for 1/1 and ping the IG-2000 itself, triggering Jabba the Hutt to deal 1 more damage to something. This can clear spies off the board, it can clear Kara's Nem, it can clear Phoenix Squadron A-Wing, it can clear a lot of things, or just something you already put a damage on, because that would be, you'd have a resource remaining, so you actually can activate Jabba before you go into this line, go into the flip, go into the IG-2000 if you have a damage thing. And that means you ended up putting 3 damage, maybe setting up a Tarkintown, or maybe setting yourself up to play something like a Topple the Summit next turn as well to clear the board. It does a pretty good amount of damage, and the fact that with Jabba's trigger you can do 2 damage to one thing actually opens up your thresholds a lot more for this to be even more threatening. That said, there's also a lot of board states where this isn't fantastic, and I resource it a decent amount as well, because I much would rather play like a takedown or something on the turn 3 in a lot of situations, but it's good when it's good, and it's another ship you can throw Vader on, which is awesome. Now we're going to get into our late game plays here. We have a lot of capital ships in our late game and then 1 transport, but these capital ships are going to lead us into a planetary bombardment finish for the game, which is kind of the idea. You're just going to put so much pressure on the board, clear the opponent's stuff, that you can end up just throwing a ton of indirect damage at their face to close the game. Ruthless Raider is our first capital ship, and this one is it's been always good ever since set 1. It still is a good card. It sometimes is not quite as impactful as you need, because one of the kind of the nemesis of this deck is the mid-range decks that kind of you lose control of and they start throwing things out. I see a lot of this with things like Queen Amidala, who creates a lot of problems on the board, although she's one of the ones where I kind of like the IG-2000 the most into her, so that does help a little bit there. But if the opponents just fill the board with Amidala, you're still struggling to deal with that, and they start dropping things like a cheapened Keller and Beck or something that drops another unit on the board. That's how you start to lose control of the game, and you play following up their Keller and Beck with a Ruthless Raider to deal 2 damage to something just doesn't feel very strong. So it does feel a little weaker sometimes. You kind of need to have a decent board state to want to play this, but then when you do, it really starts to hammer the win home, close the door on the opponent, because it starts dealing direct damage to their base. They have to deal with it. It then deals more damage to them, more direct damage to the base, and the combination of the direct damage to the base from this and then things like our Devastators and Bombardments really does help make sure you can secure the victory. We have 1 copy of First Light in here. I basically always just resource this. It is a late game play just to put something on the board when you're playing, especially against mid-range control decks, and you need to keep putting threats out. That has caused me to win the game by just being able to play it, smuggle it out, and then sometimes dealing 4 damage to another ship like a Raider, and then it has grit while the First Light is in play. I've actually used that to overcome a Condemn, allowing my Ruthless Raider to still punch in for 2 damage and making it like a salient threat on the opponent that they have to deal with. That's felt really cool too. So the First Light, the fact that you smuggle it, deal 4 damage to something, and then give it grit is like actually kind of relevant in this deck, especially when you combine this with Vader increasing the HP of things. It comes up occasionally, not a lot, enough for the one of, but I don't know if I'd put any more in there. And then closing the door on the opponent again, Devastator, 8 cost 9/6, you assign 4 direct damage, and then if the opponent doesn't immediately answer, this planetary bombardment is just 12 damage you get to assign wherever you want, plus you're threatening 9 damage on the attack. It's so much. Like, Devastator plus bombardment is nearly lethal to so many decks already. In fact, it is lethal to any 25 health base, even if you start them at 0. So they have to respect it. They have to do something about it. And when they can't answer the Devastator, you win the game. It's one of the most powerful legendaries of the game. Definitely one of the most powerful legendaries from Jump to Lightspeed. And it's how this deck can actually win as the game pushes into the late game. The other thing that it does is plays Avengers. We have our big old Star Destroyers. And yeah, if you've been keeping a decent control of the board, but you need to make sure that now is the time, now is when the opponent can't come back, that's what Avenger is here for. We have it a 2-drop because the game, you don't really always want the game to go that late, but when it does, you kind of need the Avenger to close it. When played, they sack something, they choose anything and defeat it, and then unless they can immediately kill the Avenger, you're going to take initiative and attack next turn and immediately make them defeat another thing they control while punching in the 8 damage, and it just pulls the game in your favor really, really fast. Super powerful. Honestly, kind of looking forward to the rotation of this card because it's just such a default end game for Vigilance decks. The rotation is going to be kind of nice to explore new options, but man, it's really good while we have it, and another capital ship to trigger those planetary bombardments. Going into our events now, we've talked about a lot of these already, so it's pretty simple. Force Choke, it kills stuff, it adds up damage. Force Choke combined with Jabba triggers, Force Choke combined with Death Trooper, with you know, whatever, even just simple attacks will kill a lot of things in the game. Power of the Dark Side kills anything that you can, and this is where we set up those plays early on with Pershing and Force Choke to keep a clear board so we can hit better and better units with our powers of the Dark Side. Takedown is in here at a 3 of. I've always been a huge Takedown fan, and I love it in here because we have that incidental chip damage. We're going to deal to things. It means that Takedown gets to kill a lot of things in the game. It's very easy to end up taking down things with 6, 7, 8 HP because you can find sources to deal that damage. And it hits leaders too, really importantly, because your opponent's often, I find, going to use your leader to attack your Jabba and try and get it off the board, and that usually puts it in takedown range. We have 2 copies of Topple the Summit from Secrets of Power as well. This plot card, nice card just to have in the resources on that flip turn when you can kind of set something up. If you were able to go like an IG 2000 on turn 3 into a flip Jabba Topple the Summit on turn 4, that can be pretty good. Although you have to be careful with setting that play up because you take too much damage on the base. You only have 25 HP with Tarkintown, so you can't always risk it. I actually find some of the stronger topples are just out of hand when you get to the later game and your opponent plays a bunch of stuff and you kind of just chunk some damage onto it and then go take initiative, topple, clear the board. That tends to work. It's not the craziest card. It's not like this is a Boba Fett deck where this is always live. It's sometimes live, so it's a 2 of in here. And then the Planetary Bombardment, as we mentioned, 8 indirect damage to a player, but if you have a capital ship, it's 12 instead. And if Devastator is in play, you get to choose where that 12 indirect damage goes yourself instead of them. And that just ends the game. You can just set it straight to face, but otherwise, if you just control the board enough, your opponent doesn't have options. If they have nothing in play, you just rip the bombardment on them and deal a straight 8 or 12 to the opponent, and that often makes it so that they no longer have the time to build a better board than you. They have to start taking initiative or you're going to start threatening the game, and that is definitely worth it. So that's kind of one of our big end game triggers in here. Finally, the last thing I have here is 3 Top Target. It's kind of a card that a lot of people forget about, but this is a neat little card. I found that I had a lot of resources floating around on my turn. I would end a turn going, I had 1 more or 2 more to spend, and I just, I tried to do the most efficient thing to control the board, and I just found myself with an extra resource. And then I found when I started putting Top Target in, it gave me these lines where the opponent would get some of that early damage on me as I'm trying to set up like that IG 2000 play or something. And then I actually can just top target the damage away by finding that extra, slide in that extra resource play, that extra action to put the top target on something and then go for the clear and then recover 6 damage from the base. And that really, like, you start to feel like you're almost playing with Data Vault when you resolve a couple of these top targets on the opponent. And with things like Dr. Pershing, we tend to have enough cards to not be risking too much when we're playing that. So yeah, it's felt really good. It's pretty easy to kill the things that you put the top target onto. And I felt like it's really done its job against aggro and mid-range decks in just making sure we're not playing too far behind and we really get both the advantage of Tarkintown and having enough HP to play the game. So all of that has really made this Jabba the Hutt deck work a lot better than I thought it would, and I think it's been a worthy deck to play my showcase in. But let's talk really quickly about some sideboard options you might be looking at as well. Now, when we go to sideboard, again, sideboard based on what you're playing against, what you're having trouble with, what your local meta is playing. I like some of these cards in here. Perilous Position, just because we need more options sometimes to deal with extremely fast decks. And I like this more than things like Condemn in here because it does still minus their HP, which sets us up for thresholds to be able to ping some incidental damage on and take them out while stalling them at least for a turn, because again, it's so important just to keep that damage off. Against ramp decks, I want to play Cham Syndulla because one thing we struggle with is when their resources get too out of control, their plays become a little too big, a little too out of our ability to use damage to control them. So Cham helps us keep up and get to our big plays sooner. And he's often, I think, going to come in alongside things like this No Glory Only results to then be able to kill things faster, kill the bigger things that are problems. The extra copy of Avenger is a great idea, especially if you are going to be trying to keep up with their ramp, because you need to keep up with their endgame plays, especially when you're going against other control decks or other mid-range to control decks. You need to be able to get to that late game and go kind of toe-to-toe with them rather than let them overwhelm you while you're just playing things like Death Troopers. And to really hammer it home against those decks, Crate Dragon, I think, is a really great option when you know you're going to go late in every game you play here. Well, Crate Dragon demands an answer, and if they can't answer him effectively, he still is often going to immediately get some good value. Otherwise, he's just going to close the door on the opponent faster than the Avenger often can too. So definitely another good option. You want to go to these late games and you want to have enough threats so you're keeping up playing big things, gigantic threats one after another, because the winner of those games is often the one who keeps the most threats in play, or keeps a threat in play often. So yeah, those are some of my options, but what I would love you guys to do is try the deck out. Let me know what you think, see how it goes, play it in your locals, play it online, enjoy how it plays, and see if this is really, you think, a worthy use of Jabba the Hutt leader, a leader who maybe is not the most competitive, but is very fun, and I think will often be at least fairly surprising to the opponent, which is, you know, what we like to do here on the channel. So try it out. Let me know in the comments down below what you think. Like the video if you did enjoy this deck profile or some of the ideas. I got more ideas cooking in the kitchen that I'm looking forward to bringing you guys. So subscribe if you haven't yet to make sure you catch those. We do Star Wars Unlimited videos once a week here at least, and we got more coming on the way. So hope you guys can join us here in getting those videos and enjoying the fun of one of the most fun card games, I think, on the market. And of course, I love Star Wars, so I'm never going to stop. So hope you guys keep tuning in, and we'll see you all in the next one.